Disclaimer. When wizards need help, they call for Harry Potter. When Harry Potter needs help, he calls for J.K. Rowling. As Hermione ran, she remembered Dumbledore's orders, that she obey him immediately and without question. But she also noted that Dumbledore had spoken to her very differently than he would have to Harry. Harry was much quicker to follow his orders when he impressed their importance upon him, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but he knew that Hermione would want to know his reasoning, and he explained it to her as they went. But that also meant that, knowing the reasoning behind his orders, Hermione was even quicker to take the initiative and bend them a little. The Hogwarts elves were not beholden only to Dumbledore. Umbridge had proved that, so he told her not to speak to them. But she knew one elf whose loyalty was undivided. As soon as she got to the castle, she ducked into an alcove and called for Dobby. "Miss Hermione, where are you?" Dobby said when he popped in front of her. "Shh! I'm invisible, Dobby," she said. "I need you to take a message to Professor Snape right now. It's an emergency." "It is? But I don't know where he is, miss," Dobby said fearfully. "I's not tied into the wards any more." "Oh, right." Fortunately, she had already pulled out the Math-Magician's map, and she quickly found him in the dungeons. "There he is." She pushed her arms out from under the cloak and pointed to his dot on the map. "Go to him. Tell him Professor Dumbledore's been hurt and to meet him at the clock tower immediately." "Professor Dumbledore?" he gasped. "I'll go right away, miss." Dobby vanished, and Hermione continued in that direction so she could meet Snape on the way and tell him what happened. Following the map, it was easier to intercept him, but getting his attention was a little touchy. Taking a guess at the best method, she stood in an alcove, stuck an arm out from under the cloak, and waved at him as he passed by. "Psst! Professor Snape!" she hissed. Snape whirled and drew his wand on her. She had her own up and was halfway through casting a shield charm before he lowered it. "Miss Granger," he growled. "I take it you sent the message?" "Yes, sir." "Follow me, quickly. What happened?" He turned away and kept moving as fast as he could without breaking stride. "Professor Dumbledore took Harry and I on a special mission." She wondered if she should tell him about the Horcrux, but Snape solved the problem for her. "I'm aware of Dumbledore's missions. What happened?" "It was a curse, Professor. Dumbledore put it on. I don't know why. It turned his hand black and withered, and I had to cut it off him." Snape stopped just for a second and turned to face her in surprise, before dismissing it and continuing on. "Where is he now?" "He'll be coming up the path disillusioned with Harry. That was the quickest way." "Right. Miss Granger, go to Madame Pomfrey and acquire a compartmenting potion, a blood-cleansing potion, a bottle of undiluted essence of dittany, a Wiggenweld potion, and a strengthening solution. Do you have all that?" "Compartmenting, blood-cleansing, dittany, Wiggenweld, and strengthening," she recited. "Good. Go quickly. I will meet you outside." Hermione ran. Invisible, and partly silenced, she made no sound beside her breathing, not that she ran across many people anyway. Supper was over, so most of the students had gone back to their common rooms. The infirmary was also empty of patients, which made things that much easier. Hermione whipped the cloak off and rushed into Madame Pomfrey's office. "Madame Pomfrey!" The Meadowitch shot to her feet. "Miss Granger?" "There's an emergency. I need a compartmenting potion, a blood—" "A what?" Pomfrey gasped. "Miss Granger, a compartmenting potion is highly poisonous." "Huh? That's what Professor Snape asked for." "What for? What happened?" "Professor Dumbledore's been hurt, ma'am. It was a dark curse. I'm not sure I should be telling you." "Say no more, Miss Granger," she said, springing into action. She went to a cupboard and started looking through potion bottles. "If he asked for a compartmenting potion, he must have also asked for a blood-cleansing potion." "Well, yes. How? Of course, it prevents a compartment syndrome. Makes sense. He also wanted a strengthening solution. Yes, that, and a Wiggenweld and an undiluted essence of dittany." "Undiluted? What kind of curse was this?" "I don't know, ma'am, but Snape sounded like he knew what he was talking about." "Dear Merlin, we'll have to hurry." "I'll take them, ma'am," Hermione said. "Dumbledore didn't want anyone to know we'd gone out." Madame Pomfrey stopped and looked Hermione over very quickly, her eyes darting from her face to her sword and shield, and Harry's cloak in a second, conflict playing across her face. "Snape is already with him?" she asked urgently. "Yes, ma'am." "All right. Pomfrey quickly placed the 5 potion bottles in a carrier that resembled a milk bottle rack and handed it over. "Hurry, and do whatever he says, but I want to see Dumbledore as soon as possible." "Got it." Hermione turned and ran back down the stairs to the clock tower entrance. It was nearby, but she'd still lost more time than she would have liked going for the potions. Still, she hoped things would be more or less under control once she got the potions to Professor Snape. She was completely unprepared to see the grounds ablaze and flashes of spellfire flying between 2 figures who appeared to be doing their level best to kill each other. She broke into a sprint, trying to get close enough to see what was happening. A thin red beam stabbed through the night air, and Hermione recognized her burning laser curse, while in return a fireball was shot back at the caster. Harry was visible, and under attack by a figure in black robes. A Death Eater? Here? How? But no, they didn't have the mask and hood. She set the thought aside and tried to run to flank the attackers. She got close enough to hear what was going on. "Percutio, flagello, hemorrhagia! Fulmina, Gerotes! Ah, finite! Dridristab, sectum sempra!" With the last 2 spells, the remaining 2 figures fell to the ground. "Harry!" All thoughts of fighting forgotten, she ran to her best friend's side. She gasped as she saw not just 2, but 4 people lying on the ground in the firelight, 3 of them unmoving. There was blood everywhere. Harry was the lone figure who was still moving, but he was on his back, groaning and trembling with shock. Blood was soaking through his robes alarmingly fast. She knelt down and ripped his shirt open to see 3 huge gashes cutting across his chest and bleeding heavily. "Oh God!" she gasped, covering her mouth. "Episci!" she cast. No effect. "Emendo!" Nothing. "Reparaphors!" Still nothing. "Oh, what am I thinking?" "Terigio!" She cleaned his wounds and grabbed the bottle of Dittany from the carrier, drizzling the liquid across them. To her horror, they began to close, but quickly stopped. "Damn it, Harry, you can't die on me! Come on!" His breathing was becoming labored. There was only one other thing she knew to try, and she hadn't tested it yet, but she had no other choice. "Fascio Sutra!" Loosely based on the Incarcerous Hex, her suturing charm conjured a surgical needle and thread, which made stitches along the wounds faster than any human hand was capable of. The bleeding slowed and nearly stopped. "Oh, thank God," she said. "Ferula!" Conjured bandages wrapped themselves around Harry's chest. Together, those should keep him alive long enough to get him to help. "Professor Dumbledore!" she said. He'd been lying behind Harry, and she staggered to her feet to reach him next. But then she got a good look at him, and she let out a long, loud whimper at a pitch she hadn't thought herself capable of, and fell to her knees again, dropping the potions rack. Dumbledore also had those horrible gashes, but on him, one of them went across his face, clean through his left eye, and another went through the side of his neck. His remaining eye was still open. He'd been dead before she even got there. She was dazed, oblivious at first, but she was sure it hadn't even been a minute before the quiet was rent by a howl of despair so loud it nearly deafened her. The fight on the grounds had attracted attention. Hagrid arrived first from his hut and completely broke down. Hermione came to her senses as the adrenaline kicked in again and surveyed the scene. Madame Pomfrey was running across the grounds to them with a trickle of staff and students following at a slower pace. The Medowitch screamed when she saw Dumbledore's body. Hermione ran over to her and grabbed her by the shoulders. Madame Pomfrey, look at me!" The composed Medowitch who had served through the last war returned at once. "Harry's been cursed now. I did what I could, but it wasn't enough. He's lost a lot of blood." Pomfrey nodded shakily and said, "Right. Check on the others." Hermione rushed to Snape's prone form and turned him over. No blood that she could see, and she soon found a pulse. It looked like he was just stunned. "Renevrate!" she cast, and he blinked back to awareness. Then he sat bolt upright so fast their heads nearly knocked together. "Dumbledore," he said urgently. She shook her head, choking back a sob. "Dead." "No!" He shoved her aside, knocking her to the ground. She didn't bother trying to reason with him. Turning back, she reached the final body at about the same time Professor McGonagall did, and McGonagall flipped them over to reveal Harry's and, presumably, Dumbledore's attacker. There, lying with 16 buckshot-sized holes through his chest, his eyes open and lifeless, was Draco Malfoy. "What happened?" Snape's question was low and threatening, promising all manner of trouble if he didn't get answers right bloody now.
"I only saw the end of the fight," Hermione said. "Harry and Malfoy were dueling, using lethal spells. Dumbledore was already dead. Harry killed Malfoy just as I reached him."
"What spell was Potter hit with? What caused the wounds?"
"I'm not sure."
"Think, girl."
"There were a bunch of spells," she said. "From what I could see, it had to be either Flagello or Sectum Sempra."
Snape paled. "Sectum Sempra," he hissed. "Damn that boy! I should have torn that page out."
"What, you—"
Hermione started to say, but Snape was already gone, hurrying off in the direction of the infirmary. It wasn't hard to put the pieces together, though. Snape had given Malfoy a bunch of new spells at the beginning of the school year. Sectum Sempra must have been one of them, maybe even a spell Snape had invented. Certainly, Hermione could see how to make one like it, even if she didn't know the exact details. And if Snape had given it to him, he assuredly knew the counter-curse too. But why give it to Malfoy? Maybe he just didn't think Malfoy would be so vicious. She hoped that was all it was. Snape could have been in on the whole thing, but that seemed unlikely to her. Despite what had happened, she actually felt more certain of the man's loyalty now than she had in a long time. For before he had hauled her back to the castle, she had caught a glimpse, only a glimpse before he composed himself again, of something she never thought she would see in her life. Severus Snape crying. "It's my fault," Harry said.
"No, it's not,"
Hermione told him, without bothering to ask what part of it he thought was his fault. "I should have seen Malfoy coming sooner. I didn't even know he was there until he hexed Snape in the back. I was too busy worrying about Snape and Dumbledore."
"Well, how do you think I feel, Harry?" she said. "I should have seen Malfoy following Snape on the map. I was too worried about getting what I needed from Madame Pomfrey. And even if I had, I would have been more worried about you. I mean, who would have thought he could beat Dumbledore in his fight?"
"It was his hand," Harry said flatly.
"Huh?"
"Between the curse and the missing finger, he couldn't cast as well as usual." The two of them sat in silence. Snape had repaired the damage from Malfoy's curse, and Madame Pomfrey poured blood-replenishing potions down his throat, which got him stable enough that he didn't have to go to St. Mungo's. She said Hermione had probably saved his life. Now Professors McGonagall and Jones were discussing what to do with him. Ordinarily, the safest thing would have been to send him back to Grimmauld Place, but Dumbledore had been the secret keeper, so now everyone in the Order was a potential security breach. They eventually decided to call in Ars, Shacklebolt, and Tonks to guard him in the infirmary until they came up with a more permanent solution.
"What happened out there, Harry?"
she asked him. Harry lay back down on the bed and closed his eyes. "Malfoy hexed Snape in the back," he said. "I didn't see him coming, and I guess Dumbledore didn't either. He was getting to be pretty out of it by then. Malfoy looked, I'm not sure what it was, kind of crazy, I think. Dumbledore must have known he was there to kill him. He said he knew Malfoy was behind Cho's death, too. I didn't know he knew that for sure. He told Malfoy he wasn't a killer, that Cho was an accident, but Malfoy said he had to do it. Voldemort would kill him and his mother if he didn't."
"Oh, God," Hermione whispered.
"He really did look crazy then. He looked a little scared at first, but now it was like he'd attack any second. Dumbledore was still talking, though. I don't know if it was 'cause he knew he was too weak to fight, or he actually wanted to talk Malfoy down."
"Probably both, knowing him."
"Yeah, maybe," Harry conceded. "Dumbledore said there was another way. The Order could protect him and his mother. But he wasn't listening. I was still following Dumbledore's lead. I should have just cursed Malfoy on the spot."
"Dumbledore ordered us to follow his lead, Harry," Hermione told him. "Besides, would it have gone any better if you had cast first?"
"I don't know. Maybe."
"And maybe he would have killed you, too. We can't know what might have happened. You're lucky to be alive as it is."
Harry nodded, but she could tell he didn't really believe it.
"What happened next?"
she asked. "Well, I asked Malfoy why he hexed Snape after he let him out of there, but it turned out Snape didn't know, or Malfoy said he didn't. I was a little confused about what he was saying. Something about Bellatrix not trusting Snape. I think Malfoy had his friends following Snape around or something, but I'm not sure how he followed him without anyone noticing. That's when he attacked. He didn't even try to fight me, just blocked everything I threw at him. I tried to get in front of Dumbledore, but he wouldn't let me, so I couldn't block everything Malfoy cast at him, and Dumbledore couldn't cast well enough. He caught him with a freaking Expelliarmus! How does that happen? And then that curse. He trailed off.
I think that's about where I saw what was going on,
Hermione said. I saw Dumbledore go down. I didn't know he was dead yet. I just knew I had to do whatever it took to stop Malfoy.
Yes, I saw, she said sympathetically.
I broke his shield and nailed him with a garroting curse. Then I used your shotgun curse when he stopped to cancel it. You know, I couldn't stand that git from the day I came to Hogwarts, but I never thought it would go this far. Neither had she, not really. Harry had killed someone tonight. That was something even Hermione hadn't done, and didn't want to, although she'd tried once or twice in self-defense. She knew it would probably happen before the war was over, though. She even knew from what happened with Bellatrix at the Ministry that she'd be able to do what she needed to when the time came, which was a disturbing thought in itself, but she couldn't help but think it had to be worse for Harry. One 16-year-old boy killing another 16-year-old boy who had himself been all but forced into becoming a killer. Slowly, a low, mournful song wafted over the grounds, a song filled with grief beyond the ken of mortal men, and yet a sound that eased the pain of those who heard it, if only a little. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, sang a long time, seeming to pour the whole of the old man's life into the music. Things that Hermione knew only hints about. His sister who had died in childhood. Some sort of friendship with Gellert Grindelwald. The fighting he had done in both world wars. Came through in melodies that she understood more clearly on some level without knowing the words. All fell silent upon hearing it, not wanting to break the music's spell. When it finally ended, the castle was quieter than Hermione had ever remembered it. Even the distant sound of the river below seemed to have vanished.
Harry, she whispered, I need to go home. Mom and Dad will be worried sick by now, and that's if they don't know what's happened yet. Are you going to be okay?
He stopped. I think so, he said, eventually.
If you need me for anything,
I'll let you know. Thanks, Hermione.
Good night, Harry, she said.
Hermione walked down slowly to the castle doors. There were lots of students out in the corridors now, waiting for information, or just standing in solidarity. She didn't say anything as she passed them. Many were crying. Even the Slytherins she saw had the decency to stand by respectfully. Pansy Parkinson actually was crying, although she was sure it wasn't over Dumbledore, while Crabbe and Goyle stood behind her looking stunned. The Greengrass sisters and Tracy Davis looked pretty shaken up as well, and Georgina Vector was crying too. The Greengrass sisters looked like they wanted to say something to her, but they didn't. Ginny, Ron, Luna, and Neville had already said their pieces. She didn't speak all the way down to the front gates, where she took a deep breath to steady herself, and apparated to the front entryway at home.
It's about time, Hermione, Mum said when she heard the crack. We've been worried about... My God, what happened to you?
Hermione looked down at herself and belatedly realized she was still covered in blood. She guessed she was probably pale, red-eyed, and disheveled by now, too.
Mum? Dad? Dumbledore's dead, she told them.
She dropped her sword, buckler, and coat on the floor.
Dead? Mum breathed. That mission you were doing?
Hermione shook her head, not wanting to explain.
No, Draco Malfoy killed him afterwards, and then Harry killed Malfoy.
Mum and Dad gasped. That was probably at least as hard for them to swallow as it was for Hermione.
Hermione, are you okay?
Asked Mum.
I'm not hurt, if that's what you mean.
She looked down at herself again.
I need to get cleaned up, she said. I feel just awful, she said.
Hermione was showered, changed, and nursing a mug of hot chocolate when she finally tried to tell her parents the story. And it was still coming out all out of order as her mind jumped from point to point, trying to process too many things in parallel.
It wasn't your fault, though, Dad told her. You weren't even there. But if I'd watched the map more closely, if Dumbledore had full use of his hand... You said that was from some kind of curse, he observed. Yes, but I was the one who cut off his finger. You cut off his finger? Mum gasped. He let me, she defended herself. It was a cursed ring, and it was bonded to his hand. I suggested it, and he let me. Oh, well, if he was in charge, and he told you to do it, you have nothing to feel guilty about, Mum said. Especially if you thought it was the best way to help him at the time. I know, but if I hadn't, maybe he could have defended himself. And maybe he couldn't. Hermione, you can't dwell on what might have happened, Dad said sagely. It figured he'd throw her words to Harry back at her. You just have to learn from your mistakes and move forward the best you can. The important thing is, what are you going to do now? I don't know, Dad, she replied. I really don't know.